Welcome to Brick by Brick, Building Wealth Through Homeownership. I am Kim Von Dohren, your realtor.
And I'm your banker, Ed Marko. So it's been about a month since we put out a podcast. We took the balance of the summer off to where you went to England, didn't you?
I did. One of my favorite places.
That's a fun place to go.
Yeah.
That's what people tell me anyway.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I went and saw lots of beaches on the southwest coast, which is not what you think of when you think of England, but
Right.
it's stunningly beautiful.
Fantastic. So one of the things you mentioned, I think a couple of times over the last couple dozen podcasts, is about money problems. What do you say again?
I say money problems have nothing to do with money.
Elaborate on that a little bit.
So you may recall that previously I worked as a consumer credit counselor and a financial educator for a nonprofit credit counseling agency. And I did that for a number of years. And my experience in talking to people one-on-one, especially in counseling, as well as teaching classes, individuals in the classes who I interacted with, I found, not to mention personal relationships in my own life for people who I assisted to help them get their financial situation in a better place. Most, if not all, was my experience that they really had financial problems that were not necessarily related to the amount of income that they had.
Right. Kind of, but that's a saying that I often use in the banks when I'm talking to people, is that so many people are broke just on different levels. So the person that works at McDonald's, that's making an honest living flipping burgers, sometimes actually has a better credit score and is in a better financial situation than that person that's got a master's degree in some kind of technology that's making $200,000 a year, because the person working at McDonald's takes home $20,000 a year, but only spends 12 of it. The person making $200,000 a year is spending $300,000 a
That's
year.
right.
Because they're making so much money. In their head, they're rich.
Yep.
And they are. At $200,000 a year is generally what people consider to be rich. But you're not really rich if you're not disciplined enough to take care of what you have.
Yeah. My husband, in his eternal wisdom, made this statement to me one time. If you're making $100,000, but you spend $100,001, you're still in debt. And it's oh so true.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the problem, is that you're spending more than you're earning. That creates a debt situation.
Right.
And some people are going to say, well, that's just because I hardly make any money. Agreed. That is part of the problem. But the bigger problems are your mentality about money and your personal relationships with many things in your life. So I literally started working at a consumer credit counseling agency because I wholeheartedly believed in education. I was a teacher for 4 years, and I believe that if you teach somebody a way to do things differently that would improve their lives, of course you would do it, right? Wouldn't you, Ed?
Absolutely.
Right. And most logically based people will take in new information and utilize it to improve their life. However, what I realized after spending 4 years teaching and then 4 years as a person working at a credit counseling agency was that wasn't the case. Even people who knew better didn't always do better. So even telling them, educating them. So I would think to myself, well, this is mostly a budgeting problem. If people understood how to budget, then they could change their lives. And by the way, that's actually accurate. However, I found that, especially with people I worked with one-on-one, it didn't work that way. And it, in my opinion, comes down to this. If education was enough, nobody would smoke.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It tells you right on the packet that it will kill you.
Yeah.
It can and will likely give you cancer and kill you. And yet people smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
So education's not enough.
Right.
And that tells you that people are doing something that is against their own best interests for a reason other than education.
Well, I think it comes down to that exactly what smoking is. It's a terrible habit. It's habitual. And I think for a lot of people, spending money to make themselves happy is habitual. Now, again, just to be clear, though,
Wait
I,
one second
I'm
before you
not.
go on. I think you
Mhm,
made a profound statement there.
mhm,
I think it is about spending money
mhm,
to make themselves happy.
mhm.
And on the other side of that coin, which is the same coin, is spending money to alleviate some form of pain,
Right. Yes, exactly.
emotional, mental, physical, whatever.
Yeah.
And they get some sort of a high from spending money
Mhm.
or some sort of a joy.
Right.
And so that is quite profound.
Yeah. I have an old boss that I refer to every once in a while. I'm just going to say his name. There were two of them, Bill and Ted Mayo. One of the things that Ted Mayo said to me, they owned a car dealership, and I worked there when I was going to school. And he said to me, "I'm going to tell you a story, and it's about the man in the car." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're going to be around cars," because it was a car dealership. He said, "You're going to be around cars, and you need to understand the man in the car." And I was like, "Okay, Bill." And he said, "When you look at a Ferrari, do you think about the man in the car?" And I said, "No, I think that car is really cool and I'd like to drive the car." And he said, "Yeah, that's exactly right." So the guy that bought the Ferrari bought it for all the wrong reasons. He thought people would notice him, but they don't. They only notice the car. So people that want to buy a Ferrari or anything, doesn't matter if it's a car or not, most of the time buy that fancy, expensive thing thinking that it will make them look good. But it doesn't. It makes it look like you spent a lot of money. And I said, "Okay, what's your point?" And he said, "The point is rich and wealth are two different things. What you do with money determines which way you will be. The rich person or the person who thinks they're rich buys the car so everybody can see they're rich in parentheses. The person who doesn't buy the car and invest the money actually becomes wealthy. That's something nobody sees.
Right.
Be the
Right.
person nobody sees. Because at the end of the day, when you're in your Ferrari, nobody sees you anyway. I thought that really stuck with me.
And
It
that
was
also goes to the point, which is that the money choice in those scenarios are motivated by something internal
yes,
and not about how much income you have.
right.
Because he might have bought that Ferrari and he could afford it, but maybe it put him in debt,
Yeah.
right? So it's the internal stuff
Mhm.
that I think creates most of the financial problems.
Yeah.
And that's why I say money problems have nothing to do with money.
Right. And also to be clear, we're not talking about the person who's working at McDonald's that's struggling. It's their first job or second job, whatever it is. You're working your way through college, or you didn't go to college and you're struggling. And this is a part of your life that's difficult. Everybody goes through difficult times. I went through difficult times 3 or 4 times over my lifetime. I'm sure you did too.
Of course.
The smart person who doesn't have the bad habit of spending money to make themselves think they're happy is going to look at their situation and say, "Wow, I'm in a rough situation. I can't afford an apartment on my own. I'm going to need roommates." And they make that happen. They realize they can't afford the car that they have now. They sell it and pay off whatever loan they have that came with that. And they take public transportation until they work their way back out of that situation. There's nothing wrong with not making a lot of money. It's knowing that you're not making a lot of money.
Yes. I think your lifestyle has to match your income.
Yes.
That's very hard
Yeah, it
for a
is.
lot of people, especially now. I mean, to acknowledge the era that we are in, inflation has escalated to a number that is created a huge gap from wages. Wages and income did not keep up with each other.
Correct.
And so it is harder to buy a car, buy a house, exist in general now.
Mhm.
It is absolute that's a truth.
Yeah.
That's not like something that's an opinion. Really, it is factually more difficult to exist on every level than it used to be because things are way more expensive and wages have not kept up. So we say that knowing that we are not disregarding that issue or the effect of that on people's lives.
Right.
However, I will tell you a little story. This is my own personal story. I was working at an insurance company and I had worked in insurance claims for years and years and years, and they pay you a decent wage. And at the time, I was making, we're going to just for round numbers, $48 to $52,000 a year. That's great. That's $1,000 a week. I decided that I wanted to become a teacher. So I chose a program in the school district of Philadelphia where they were offering you the opportunity to come teach before you had your certification. And in order to do that, you were basically taking a full-time job as an intern style teacher. And my salary was going to be $27,000 and some change. So I
Wow.
was almost 50%
And
reduction in salary.
in Philadelphia.
And I
Yeah.
yes, and I
Yeah.
was moving from the county we live now, which is much more affordable, to Philadelphia, where it was going to cost me more to live in every way.
Wow.
Now, to do that, there was no possible way I could have moved down there and lived by myself. So the first thing I initiated was I moved in with my roommate from college who had her own house, who had a spare room, and I paid her rent instead, which was far more affordable. What I did, eh, because I knew my lifestyle was going to have to adjust down, I started living off of what my salary would be 6 months before it happened. 'Cause I'd
Right.
have a cushion, right?
Right.
If
Right.
I made a mistake or I got myself in trouble or I did that. So I did manage to live off that salary. I did it. I lived off that salary for 6 months. When I moved down there, I was required to get my certification and my master's degree in education. So in the course of the 4 years that I lived in Philadelphia and I taught, I also got my master's degree. In that 4 years, my salary this is almost humorous. My salary went from $27,000 a year and some change. By the time I was done and I had been teaching for 4 years and I had a master's degree, my salary was $38,000 and some change.
Wow. Still not even making what you were making at
Correct.
the insurance company. Wow.
But by the time I had left there, I also spent my summers working. So I worked as a temp doing claims, which I had done before, and I did not accumulate any debt while I was there. I lived a full social life. I took vacations and I put myself through graduate school.
Wow.
And I did that on virtually very little money.
Right.
So I say that in that if you can control yourself, you can do a lot more than you realize.
Right. So that I think has a lot to do with being aware of what you're doing and being aware of what your real situation is. I don't know about you. I know I also did a lot of credit counseling. And one of the hardest conversations that I would have with everybody right up front was show me your budget. And they would look at me I like a deer in headlights. They had no idea what the budget was. When we started going into what their budget should be, you could literally say to these people, you're delusional. You have to be honest with, if you, to thine own self be true, you must be honest with yourself before you can fix that financial problem. Because, like you said earlier, it's got nothing to do with money and everything to do with you.
I do think, however, to be fair, if I'm going to tell you, the whole story, I did it all wrong before I did it right. And when I used to teach financial education classes, budgeting, it was like my favorite class to teach, that and credit reports and credit scores. But I love teaching budgeting because
Mhm.
I realized that budgeting was the thing that set me free. That was the thing that allowed me to take control of my financial situation and have everything I wanted. People think that budgets actually restrict you, and they don't. They actually free you. They give you the freedom to choose what's in it.
Right?
And so when I would stand up in front of the class to teach budgeting, I would be so excited. People would look at me like I was nuts. And I'd be up there all jazzed up and standing there. And the first question I used to ask people is I'm going to say a word. And when I say this word, I want you to tell me what it makes you feel. And I would say the word budget.
Yeah.
And right, you can
Yeah.
imagine
Yep.
it was not
Yeah.
positive.
Right.
And so then I explained to them why. And I promised them by the end of the class, they would see why it is that it's freeing and not limiting. But I will tell you, that was my experience as well. People, they don't want a budget because the truth is the hard part about budgeting is acknowledging your situation.
Right.
And they don't want to do that. They don't want to look at their situation because it's scary. And the funny thing is sometimes it's not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah.
But having sat as a credit counselor and taken 20 calls a day, taking people through their budgets, the amount of ignorance, and I use that word in its literal meaning, their lack of awareness, their lack of knowledge of where their money was going
Mhm.
was really creating utter peril for them moving forward. People would have deficits, monthly deficits that were in the hundreds and even sometimes thousands of dollars, which is why they had credit card debt in the tens of thousands. And that's not sustainable. Eventually that comes to a screeching halt.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I would say that budgeting is the thing if you can embrace it. However, I'm going to now point out the part that this particular podcast is based on, which is that, okay, so I've done because I always say math isn't negotiable.
Right. Yeah.
It's not. You earn this much, you spend this much, though you can't negotiate that. The only thing you can negotiate is what you spend or what you earn. And it's usually easiest and quickest to adjust your spending, right?
Right.
However, I'm going to give you an example. I used to have to teach a bankruptcy class. So if you declare bankruptcy, do you know this, Ed? You have to go through a counseling class.
Wow. Okay.
Yep, it's part of bankruptcy. So I taught that bankruptcy class. And I had a gentleman who sat in my bankruptcy class one time, and he was definitely over the age of 65. He was retired. He was living off of a fixed income. But his fixed income was fairly significant. It was way more than he needed to live. And so we're sitting there because I take you through a budget, that's part of it. And I went over to talk to him. He must have asked me a question. And as I looked at his budget, I was like, you have a huge surplus at the end of the month. Like,
Yeah.
how did you get in this room? How did you end up at a bankruptcy class? How did you end up in bankruptcy? And he was like, well, and I said, there's something missing from your budget. I don't know what it is, but the math shows you have a surplus. You shouldn't be in bankruptcy. And he said, I like to gamble.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. I said, so what are we talking here? And he said, well, I like to go to the casino. And I said, okay. I said, so if that's the case, why is it in your budget? And he said, well, I can't put that in my budget. And I said, why not? And he said, because I shouldn't be gambling. And I said, who said? And he said, well, I shouldn't be spending my money that way. And I said, well, maybe that's true. I said, but here's the thing. You gambled anyway. Whether you should or whether you shouldn't, you were doing it.
Yeah.
And my guess is you're going to continue to do it.
Yeah.
So if you want to fix whatever addiction or issue you have that's causing you to gamble, then take some money, get yourself a therapist and work that out.
And put that in your budget.
But at the moment, while you're spending the money on gambling, put it in your budget. Give yourself permission to spend this much money every single month. You give yourself an allowance for it so that you then have it so you can go gamble guilt-free. And when it's gone, and next month you can do it again. And you can break it up into weekly amounts or however you want to do it. For now, put it in your budget.
Right.
Whether it's morally all right or not all right. If you're doing it, it belongs in your budget.
Yep.
And fix your internal problems, and then you can take it out of your budget.
Right.
But that goes to the same issue, which is that internal struggle where they're spending money didn't have anything to do with how much money he was making or had coming in because he wasn't making it anymore. He was retired. But
Right, right. Income. We'll just call it income.
yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of leads me to a little saying that, again, I'll attribute this to my two old bosses. When they were teaching me how to make a budget, this is before I was, this was when I was a very young man, and they were teaching me about budgeting. And I had a penchant for tequila, and there was no tequila in my budget. And my boss said, "You got to. I know you drink tequila. Put that in your budget." And I said, "I don't want to put demons in my budget." He said, "Well, I see you have dog food in your budget." I said, "Well, yeah, I have a dog." He said, "Well, a demon is like a dog. If it's in your life, it's in your budget. Put the demon in your budget."
It's just like
Yeah.
cigarettes.
Right.
It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
Lottery, I know somebody's obsessed. Like, just put it in there.
Right.
It's absolutely the truth. It will set you free.
Well, it's a way for you to be honest with you.
Yes.
And when you look at what you're spending on something like that, you go, gee, you know what? I don't need to have that tequila, or I don't need to gamble, or I don't need to
Yeah.
smoke anymore. It'll give you the motivation to make yourself a better person. You can use that money for far better things.
Yes.
So that's part of the whole thing that earlier I said, you need to be honest with where you are in your life and with yourself.
Yes.
You must be honest with yourself.
I think you need to ask yourself, why am I spending this money on this thing?
Right.
And I'm going to give one final little story here. I have somebody in my life who I was helping them with their budgeting. And at the time, this is years ago, but at the time they had 2 children still in high school. And when we were working on the budget, I found that there was a propensity to want to spend on things that were not affordable for this family. And I I was having this conversation with her and saying, Why would you do this? This doesn't financially make sense. It doesn't." And what I finally realized in my conversation was that there was this attachment to pleasing her children, demonstrating love through spending. And these were the habits that were creating financial distress for her.
Mm.
And I noticed that I noticed it first with her children, but then I also noticed it was with other people in her life. And so there was spending going on that was not affordable, I think, in a way to secure love from people
Sure.
or need that they need her. And so again, those weren't financial problems.
Yeah.
They were internal problems.
Yeah.
So I just encourage folks to ask themselves, why do I want to buy this right now? Why do I want to spend on this right now? What's really underneath that desire? Because the one thing, this one little tip that is so simple is that the difference between rich people and poor people is what they do with money.
Yeah.
Rich people see money as a means for making more money.
Yeah. Wealthy people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wealthy people. Poor people see money as what they can spend.
Yeah.
I have this money. It's my tax return. It's my whatever. Now I have money. I can go buy this or take that vacation, or it's a spending. And that is not how rich people. And as someone who wasn't raised this way, which I want to acknowledge that as well, we often become our parents.
So yeah, that's a true story. One of the things that I noticed all of my life is that poverty is hereditary. The parents who live in poverty teach the children how to live into poverty, who teach the grandchildren how to live in poverty.
Right.
Until somebody breaks that chain,
Right.
it will continue. And you can be the one that breaks that chain. You just need to understand yourself and understand that's where you came from and correct it. It's way easier than people think it is. It requires discipline.
It does. It means doing it differently than you've always done it.
Right.
That means it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And discomfort is part of change. If you can't bear discomfort, you'll never change.
Right.
But it is absolutely true. I learned how to do it all wrong. I always tell the joke about how when I was in college, and we had reached the end. So in college, they love to give you credit cards, right? So I got myself in credit card debt pretty quickly because I didn't have any my family had not taught me good money management skills. And so by the time I got to college and they were giving me, Visa MasterCards, I was like, woohoo, you know. And then I worked a little bit, but your part-time work mostly in college. And it was the summer after my sophomore year, and my roommate and I needed to get jobs for the summer. Well, the credit card companies were calling us nonstop because we were behind on all of our credit card bills. The lady would hang up with me. She'd call back on, because back then you only had one phone, right? It was
Right,
the
right.
house phone.
Yeah.
She'd hang up, the phone would ring, and it would be for my roommate. It was the same lady. It was hilarious that happened. She was the collections lady for Sears,
Yeah. Oh
and she
gosh.
would call us. Yep. So there we are. We are trying to get jobs, but we don't want to answer the phone. Well, you need to answer the phone, right?
Right.
So we're like, what do we do? Oh, brilliant. Let's go get an answering machine. So we literally went and charged an answering
At
machine.
Sears.
That's right. Brought it home and plugged it in and used the answering machine so that we could get voice messages so that we could call to get a jobs
Yeah.
and not take the collection calls from the credit card
Something
company.
the cell phone generation will never know about.
That's right. That's right.
Nobody's voice,
Yeah.
nobody's name is on
But
on
I
those
always say to
phones.
people, I did it all wrong first.
Yeah.
And believe me, I still have habits that are ingrained in me that go against my own benefit in many moments. And I can recognize them. There's still times I don't always recognize them. I'll put myself in auto mode in my brain and I'll just buy or spend on something that's unnecessary. Fortunately, they're never large things.
Mhm.
But yeah, I get it. I understand. It's a mindset. It's a belief system, that feeling of I live in perpetual deprivation. I'm constantly depriving myself of something.
Yeah.
And so then when money comes, the first thing you want to do is spend it so that you feel like you aren't living in deprivation anymore.
Yeah, but wouldn't it feel much better to have 6 months worth of money in the bank so that if there is a problem, you're secure?
There's an easy answer to that. It's actually no. And I say that because I have lived like that.
Yeah.
When you live in deprivation, that feels like a pipe dream.
Yeah.
It does. That feels like a holy Moses, that's a 6 months down the road. Right now, I feel that pain inside of me of not having anything.
Right.
And I want that pain to go away as fast as possible. I'm not saying it's right.
Right.
The best thing is to do what you said.
Yeah.
That is absolutely the right answer. There's something that some people say, is that the right answer or the truth? No, that's the right answer.
Yeah.
But the truth is 9 times out of 10, people are just going to go, buy the car or get their nails done or buy a new phone. That's what so that they get to feel like they have something. Because that money's sitting in the bank, you don't have the experience of money unless you spend it.
Right. But becoming secure is having the money, not spending the money. You certainly spend money on what you need. And on the other side of the coin, I've been in really bad financial straits myself, usually because of financial decisions that I made, not necessarily overspending or things like that, but making a bad business decision or a health problem. Health problems can set people back worse than anything, especially these days. You need to work your way out of that. I know that's hard to hear when you're in a health problem. That's hard to hear when you're in financial dire straits because of a bad business decision. But at the end of the day, you still need to do the right thing if you want to ever become secure. If you ever want to actually be wealthy, if you ever want to not have money problems, you need to stop spending money on things that you do not need, no matter how bad you want them, and put that money towards paying off whatever debts you have. And then once those debts are paid off, don't do it all over again. You have to discipline yourself to put that money away, whether it's in a statement savings account at first, if you need to put it in some kind of a timed savings thing, like a certificate of deposit for 6 months, 12 months, a year, whatever that is, or contribute to your 401k if you're working and you have a 401k and watch that 401k grow. There is, as much as you think it's great to have the new car, when you see that first 5,000, then 10,000, then 20,000, then $100,000 in the bank, that feels a lot better than any Mustang.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree. And it is also my experience that when people have accomplished that, they do have that experience.
Yeah.
But I think that that's step 2.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
Yes.
internally, they first have to have the fight with themselves
Right. Yes.
about, can I delay the gratification?
Right.
And that's the internal problem
Mhm.
that has to be. And with, you know, having discussed with you in the podcast and outside of the podcast, I am aware that you had somebody in your life growing up who demonstrated and directed you around how to be with money that was much more healthy
Oh, yes.
than I think people who are growing up in situations and didn't have that. That
Right.
programming is pretty strong. And so changing that programming takes more than you saying that, me teaching them a budget class.
Mhm.
That brings me back to if education was enough, everybody would do it.
Right.
I think the reason for this podcast, which is you have to look inside yourself
Mhm.
and realize what is motivating my spending choices.
Well, and education isn't enough, but it also, your level of education has nothing to do with your ability to discipline yourself.
Correct.
The man who taught me how to be disciplined with money, even though I wasn't when I was very young, he showed me the way,
Mhm.
had an 8th grade education.
Right.
And when he died, he left an estate. A lot of people with 8th grade educations die and they leave a bill, not an estate, a bill for their children to pay. And I've experienced that too.
Right.
The man who taught me how money actually works was my real dad. The man who left a bill, or rather was my stepdad. My stepdad was the man who taught me how money works. My real dad left my sister and I bills to pay when he died. She paid for a funeral. There were other expenses. So you don't need to be brilliant. You just need to be honest
Right.
with yourself. I can't stress that enough. You need to look at yourself and what you're doing and understand why you're doing it. Why are you doing that? Why?
And I think to just acknowledge that social media is not helping people's spending,
No, not at
because
all.
the compulsion to keep up with
Mhm.
fill in the blank really is not financially healthful at all.
Right.
And so the amount of advertising now by people, the average person is advertising a million products on any of the grams. And so that is inspiring more spending,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And don't be fooled. That is not going to bring you joy.
Yeah, and it's buy now, pay later
Yeah.
society. So it's instant gratification, not at your expense today, at your expense for years to come in the
Hmm.
future. For
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 sure.
years and years to come, you'll pay for that thing that you got a little bit of joy out of for a couple of hours.
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But I would like to at least end on this very positive note, which
Yes.
is, if you are willing to take a look at yourself and see what's driving your behaviors and your choices, and you're willing to educate yourself on a way to do it differently that takes you in the direction you want to go, my first recommendation would be, look around your world and find somebody who appears to be doing it in the way in which you'd like to be doing it if you don't know how, and ask them if they'd help you.
Yeah.
You can do it. You can change the way you're being, and then you can educate yourself, and then you can absolutely change your life.
I think that's great advice. Well,
Thanks.
until next time, I'm Ed Marko.
And I'm Kim Von Dohren.
You have been listening to Brick by Brick. Be sure and subscribe, post questions for future episodes, or comment. This is a Super Squirrel production, Super Squirrel Studios, Stony Creek Mills, Pennsylvania.